Thank you for accepting our invitations. In Russia, you are among friends. The plenary session of our Humanitarian Economic Forum includes a lot of people, and it is symbolic that our program starts with this event. Our slogan is Technology and Security in the name of sovereign development for the betterment of mankind. This sounds really significant, and we will cover the entire range of issues from finance and investment to the social agenda, education, and the current dynamic developments in the digital sphere. Our priority is improving the conditions of living of our people and solving their everyday problems. When we discuss energy, logistics, agriculture, transportation, healthcare, we also hold a number of interesting discussions. We cover ideas and proposals and projects on upcoming promising projects. We discuss potential commercial contracts. Everyone understands the potential of the African continent. Over the past 20 years, GDP rose by 4.5% a year. The human potential of the continent has been rising greater than anywhere else in the world. It forms the demand for global products and services higher than anywhere else in the world. Russia, its business circles, its government is interested in deepening the economic and humanitarian ties with the continent. All of our countries are interested in that, interested in improving our well-being. Last year, our trade with Africa reached $18 billion. This was the result of the previous Russia-Africa Forum in Sochi. And I am confident that in the upcoming future we will be able to increase our trade even more. Just this year we saw an increase of a third in our trade. Over 50% of products delivered to Africa from Russia are food, chemical products, and industrial products and machine-building products. We understand how important food security is for Africa, how important it is for social and political stability on the continent. That is why we'll continue to prioritize delivering wheat, barley, maize, and other crops to the African continent, including as humanitarian aid as part of the UN food programs. The statistics are very clear. Last year, the trade between Russia and Africa in agricultural products rose by 10%, amounting to $6.7 billion. And by June this year, it was increased by 60% more. In 2022, Russia shipped 11.5 million tons of crops to Africa, and in the first 6 months of this year, almost 10 million tons. And that is despite the illegal sanctions that were introduced against Russia that complicate the logistics, the shipment, and the banking process. So it is somewhat ironic. On the one hand, the West is trying to hamper our deliveries of grain and crops to Africa, and on the other hand, they continue to blame us for the crisis situation in the global food market. This was clearly visible in the so-called grain deal that was concluded with the participation of the UN Secretariat, and it was aimed at ensuring global food security, decreasing famine, fighting famine, and helping countries, including those in Africa. But in almost a year of the grain deal, 32.8 million tons of cargo was delivered from Ukraine, and 70% of those went to countries with a higher income, primarily the European Union, whereas countries such as Ethiopia, Sudan and Somalia only accounted for less than 3% of the total volume of shipments, less than 1 million tons. Russia agreed to the so-called grain deal because it included obligations that our Russian shipments of crops will no longer be subject to certain restrictions. And this was our attempt to help the poorest countries of the world. Unfortunately, no single part of the grain deal was in fact carried out by our Western partners. In fact, they kept creating obstacles for the programs that we had to deliver fertilizers to the poorest countries that were free of charge. Out of the 262 tons of fertilizers, only 2 batches were delivered. 34,000 tons to Kenya and over 200,000 to Malawi. So, despite the fact that this was a purely humanitarian action and it was not supposed to be in any way restricted by sanctions, some would say that Russia must not receive additional payments as part of the economic sanctions, but this was free of charge. This was free goods delivered to Africa. That is why we decided to withdraw from the grain deal, and we are ready to continue to support the poorest countries of Africa, both on the commercial basis and free of charge. This year we're expecting record yields. And in addition to that, I'd like to say that in the upcoming months, in the upcoming 3 or 4 months, we are ready to provide to Burkina Faso, to Zimbabwe, to Mali, to Somalia, to the Central African Republic, to Eritrea, up to 25 and to 50,000 tons of grains, and we will make sure that this grain and these products are delivered to the consumers free of charge. Maybe you would like to hear some more statistics. In the past agricultural year, Ukraine produced 55 million tons of grains. Exports was 47 million tons, which is a lot. 17 of those were wheat. And Russia, on the other hand, produced 156 million tons. 60 million tons of wheat, and 60 million tons were exported. 48 million tons were of wheat. Our share in the global market is 20%. Ukraine's share is less than 5%, which means that Russia makes a greater contribution into global food security and is globally is a responsible supplier of food products and grains. The so-called grain deal, those who try to portray us as betraying the grain deal, they are simply changing the facts, they are lying. And this has been a practice that's been widely used by the West in recent years. So Russia will continue to provide humanitarian shipments, humanitarian aid to the poorest countries. We will continue to try to form a more just system for delivering and shipping products and goods. We are convinced that if we use agricultural technologies and organize agricultural production in a more efficient way, not only will be able to help Africa create food for itself, enough food for itself, but also to become an exporter of food products. And Russia will continue to support that process, that development. Yesterday, as I met my colleagues in the bilateral meetings that I've had, I talked about that to my African counterparts, and they told me that they have the capacity to produce food. All they need is technological support, and Russia is prepared. We are very much willing to share our technologies and our best practices with Africa. We are interested in developing ties with African states in the field of energy. We have a long-standing, rich experience and history of cooperating with Africa, and the Soviet Union did. We've had projects, joint projects in Angola, in Ethiopia, and in other countries. 4.6 gigawatts were of energy have been produced by these joint products. A fourth of all hydroelectric power plants' output was thanks to Russia and the Soviet Union. We are currently helping Africa meet the rising demands of African countries in fuel, in oil products, etc., in the access of African countries to reliable and cheap energy sources. We have over 30 promising energy projects with Russian participation that are currently in progress in 16 African states. The overall capacity of the energy projects that are currently in work right now, in progress, is 3.7 gigawatts. Rushydro company is currently cooperating with African countries, including as well as Lukoil, Rosneft, Gazprom. They are working on various energy projects in multiple African countries. The exports of crude oil increased by 2.6 times in the past few years. Rosatom is currently constructing the Dabar nuclear power plant in Egypt. Russia is ready to provide its unique experience to Africa, as well as its state-of-the-art ways of using peaceful atom in agriculture, in healthcare, etc. Russian-African industrial cooperation is also on the rise. Our industrial production, including cars, vehicles, machine-building equipment, are very much in demand on the African continent. It is very reliable, easy to use, and cheap. In Africa, there are service centers to help Africans use and maintain our products. We provide help to deliver our products to Africa. Loans and investments programs exist to help African countries with loans and leasing of. There's a special investment fund to help finance infrastructure projects. In Egypt, for example, as I spoke about that with my friend President Al-Sisi yesterday. We're going to launch a Russian industrial zone near the Suez Canal. Canal. This year, new production facilities, capabilities will be launched there and then expanded throughout the rest of Africa. Communications technology are also our priority. We are expanding our cooperation in the area of digital security, AI, digital economy. We have good experience in using and creating and using digital technologies in taxation, in property rights, in providing state services to citizens and legal entities. We could help African countries in launching similar systems and are always ready to share our progress in these spheres. To help expand the entire range of our economic ties, it is important to move to transactions in national currencies, including the ruble, which is why we are ready to help the African countries to develop their financial infrastructure and help their banks to become part of the Russian-made system of financial transactions and communications, which will allow to make trans-border payments notwithstanding various restrictions that were created by the West.
It will help us to increase the safety of mutual transaction, and Russia is reorienting its transport and logistical flows towards the states of the global south, including Africa, of course. International transport corridor north-south that we are developing now has the aim to allow Russian commodities to enter Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, from where they will be able to travel by sea to the African continent, among other places. And of course, this corridor can be used in reverse as well to supply African commodities to the Russian market. And joining this transport corridor with Africa and launching regular navigation for the cargo ships, that's what we are looking for. Launching Russian Transport and Logistics Center in one of the ports in Africa would be a good thing, a good start for this joint effort. Providing wider coverage of the African continent with direct flights, we deem it important. Participation in the development of the African Railroad network. These are the goals where we propose to our African friends to work together on. Russia is interested in developing multi-layered ties with all the regional and integrational associations and structures. For example, we stand for having cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union as the largest integrational project, where Russia is a member, an African continental zone of free trade that is created within the African Union. We are ready to share our integrational experience with the African Union and of our experience of the Union states. We're going to have a working business lunch with the heads of state that are presiding over major regional organizations in Africa and heads of the executive bodies of these organizations. We can share our proposals on such important issues as lifting restrictions with the one market, functioning of the free trade zone, coordination of the farming, industrial, and other kind of policies. I'm convinced that this kind of cooperation in complex, both bilaterally and multilaterally, will allow us to have new quality and quantity if we speak about ties with Africa. And I would like to direct your attention to the fact that cooperation in economic and humanitarian areas was proved by the intergovernmental commissions. But only 1/3 of the countries on the continent have such commissions with Russia, 18 out of 54. And in this regard, we suggest those countries who are not yet covered by this program to think about shaping, creating such commissions with us. We are willing to do that, and we deem it useful to do that, and we are ready to expand the network of Russian trade representations in Africa to increase the staff of the economic advisors on farming, education, science, and information communication technology. Dear friends, we plan to continue to pay attention to strengthening cultural, scientific, educational, sport, and youth exchanges between Russia and African nations. In this regard, our country can offer a lot. And traditional area of the Russian-African cooperation has always been training of the highly qualified personnel. Just now, with the heads of the African Union, that was one of the topics we discussed. We have almost 35,000 students from Africa studying in Russian universities, and this number is growing. The quota for Africans that are receiving support from the budget increased by 2.5 times. And for the next year, we are going to have more than 4,700 people who will receive scholarship from the budget. We plan to launch the branches of the leading Russian universities in Africa. Close cooperation with the African educational institutions is also done within the Russian-African Network University. And before our forum on July 26 in St. Petersburg, in one of the St. Petersburg universities, we signed an agreement on the establishment of the Russian-African Consortium of Technical Universities, the Resources of Africa, where we will train experts together for the mining and geology areas. I think it's a very important area of cooperation. We will continue to help our African friends, not only in higher education, but also in vocational education. We will train teachers, mentors, and technical personnel for schools and vocational schools. We will establish joint schools, and we are already working on the textbooks based both on Russian and African educational programs. We suggest looking into creating schools with subjects being taught in Russian. I'm sure that the implementation of such projects, teaching the Russian language, introduction of the high educational standards that we have in our country, will lay a great foundation for the equal cooperation in the future. Next year, the International Organization of the Russian Language will start its operation. All countries can join it. All countries that love Russian language and want to use the Russian language. All the countries that are interested in Russian culture. We invite our African partners to join this effort. Some of the African countries launched the project to open the centers for teachers, for schools and nurseries and kindergartens. And with this aim in mind, we plan to get more African students in Russian pedagogical higher education institutions. More than 10,000 are now studying in medical schools. Healthcare and mitigating the epidemics is an important area of the Russian-African cooperation. I would like to remind you that Russia has been one of the first ones to help Africa during the coronavirus pandemic. Free of charge, we sent millions of Russian test kits. And with South Africa, we carried out scientific research of the new types of the dangerous virus. And to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we sent 2 mobile labs from Russia, and we work with Guinea in Kindi to study the new viruses, where we have more than 20 medicines, and a lot of specialists were trained according to Russian standards to prevent and to control the disease spread. And also, we have established a similar center in Burundi. We have established a Russian program to mitigate the epidemics in Africa up until 2026, and We have 2.2 billion rubles allocated under this program. We're going to train hundreds of specialists. We are going to carry out joint researches. With every year between Russia and Africa, we have more and more youth exchanges. People, youth from the African countries, they make brief trips to Russia. People from political, business circles travel to Russia under this New Generation program. We also maintain ties with those Africans who received their education in Russia. It was a pleasure to me to talk to my colleagues who can speak Russian fluently. And using this opportunity, I would like to invite our young African friends to travel to our country in March 2024 to Sochi for the World Youth Festival. This is going to be a large-scale forum that is going to see young people coming from across the world, more than 20,000 representatives from more than 180 countries of the world going to participate. We attach great significance to cooperation in the physical education and sports. We are willing to continue to develop ties with the sports federations in Africa. We suggest to cooperate more actively along the physical education universities in Russia and Africa to carry out exchanges, volunteer programs, to organize joint competitions between our national teams and universities. We invite the African athletes to participate in the International University College Sport Festival in Yekaterinburg, in the Urals, and the Games of the Future that will be held in February, March 2024 in Kazan, and are going to be a unique combination between the sport disciplines with the most popular video games and other technology devices. This new format will combine classic and innovation disciplines. Russia is also willing to develop cooperation with the African nations, with the African continent in the area of the mass communications, including in the exchange of content, organizing educational courses, training courses for the mass media personnel and for students to try out some experimental ideas. We are now working on launching the leading Russian media in Africa, Россия сегодня, TASS, RT Network, Российская газета Daily, and we want to create the shared information environment between Russia and Africa, where the audience will receive unbiased information on what is happening in the world today. And in conclusion, I would like to emphasize one more time that Russia is sincerely interested in continuing developing and deepening the cultural and economic cooperation with all the countries in Africa. I am confident that this forum and all the meetings, all the roundtables, all the negotiations within this forum will be useful and will help us to achieve all the shared goals that we have, common goals that we have. Thank you for your patience and for your attention.
Большое спасибо, господин президент.